Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Bree Hansen, and I am one of the members of the HRM Plus support team. And my partner in crime, Deb, is also on the line today. And we're going to be going over user roles, specifically with the job application system today. We will be doing other webinars in the near future that are specific to the roles of the other portals. I hope everybody had a good long weekend, and if you are a veteran or know a veteran, thank you so much for your service. It's a little weird to jump in on a Tuesday when it feels like a Monday and have a webinar first thing in the morning, so hopefully I won't forget anything important. But please know that you have permission to ask clarifying questions and ask us to slow down or whatever you need to help you understand the topic we're covering today. And user roles, they can be a little complicated and confusing. So we don't mind taking the time to have a dialogue about those roles. So we're going to start with a PowerPoint, but then we're going to actually go to our release site, and when it comes time to assigning roles and showing you the different ways to add roles to users' accounts. And then I'm going to show you a really easy way to pull a report to get lists of roles. And it doesn't matter what portal you want the list for. It's a really nice export that's available to sites. So that's kind of the flow of today's webinar. So let's get rolling. Okay. So user roles. So on your HRM portal, doesn't matter which portal you have. You know, we have 4 different systems out there. Access is controlled on your portal 2 main ways: by permission set for your pages and by roles. And they kind of work in combination. So we can say that on this particular page, we're going to get permission for these roles to access this page and whatnot. I know that's kind of confusing, but that's up to, kind of Deb and I and Sherry and whoever else on the support team kind of handles that. And then we give you usually the system manager, the ability to pick, to assign roles to users within your site, different roles to access things within your site. And I will make more sense as I'm going. I'll kind of get going. I know it's early in the morning and I haven't had my coffee yet, so I hope to be more articulate as I move along. Okay. To try to make things a little easier to grasp and understand, I like to think that all the roles on your site can be grouped into 3 categories. You've got your basic roles, which are roles that you can give basically to anybody. So those are the automatically assigned roles when someone creates an account, so that registered user and so on, and those are the roles that your applicants get. Those basic roles, anybody roles. And then we've got roles that I would group into a category called specialty roles. And those are the roles that you're going to give to your hiring managers. So they're roles that give them specific access to a certain type of applicant or a certain location. They're very specialized. Doesn't give them complete access to everything, and and you can kind of control that. So those are your specialty roles, and on like a jobs portal, it's specific for hiring. And then we have the limited access roles, and these are roles that you should only be giving out to very select people because of the responsibility that goes with those roles. The limited roles are your HR admin roles and your system manager roles. And I call them limited roles because you don't want to give them out to many people because of the, an HR admin role, they have access to all the confidential data on your site. And a system manager has access to not only all the confidential data, but all the setup. And they can go in and they can make changes to a portal, and not just the portal that maybe if they're on the jobs portal, but they also have access if you subscribe to more than one portal. So there's some big implications if they go in and mess with data. They could go in and change permissions. They could go in and mess with lookup tables, and it could have a cascading effect on maybe if you're an employee records district or a professional development district. So you have to make sure those people that you're giving those roles to understand the responsibility that they're going to have by having that access. Okay. So very recently, we've gone through and we've redone all the documentation around roles for the portals. And I am still in the process of uploading that to all our sites. There's quite a few of you and quite a few portals. So if it's not there, it's coming. And I'm actually show you that documentation today before we finish this webinar. And you'll notice that I've color-coded the roles to try to help maybe visualize, to give you that visual where this role fits in those three categories. I'm just trying really hard to maybe make it a little easier for people to understand where these roles fit, because there is a little confusion. So today we're going to start by talking about those basic roles first. There's two roles that every user, no matter what, gets automatically assigned by the system when they create an account. And the first one is registered user. And people say, well, what does it mean? Well, it just really means that they've registered on the portal. So this role is auto-assigned when they create their account. It indicates to the system that they have registered to the portal. My biggest word of caution is don't delete the role. If you delete the role, their account will not work right. If you try to, they won't be able to log in their account. You won't be able to shadow their account without getting some funky error messages and stuff. So it's just one of those, I wish we could actually gray it out and you couldn't touch it because it needs to be there, but you don't have to worry about it role. So it's just kind of a no-brainer, just leave it alone. Questions about that? Okay. The second role that just kind of automatically gets added to an account that you just leave alone is subscriber. And that's another one. It just means that they've subscribed to the portal. Whatever that really means, we don't care. Just leave it alone. Don't delete the role. Just let it be. And Deb, you know, you can pipe in and add if you want. The next role, and this is where people struggle, the guest role. So when someone first creates an account, in addition to getting registered user and subscriber, the other role that is automatically assigned in the beginning is the guest role. And this just indicates that they're new. It means they haven't completed their profile. And on the online application, what that means is they haven't made it through the profile, so we don't necessarily know what their interest type is yet. We don't know where to group them. You know, that might mean they haven't done their disclosure yet. There's a couple of things that fit in that profile. You know, they give us their address, their phone number, preferences. So until an applicant or a user, because they're not an applicant technically yet, completes that beginning part of their account, the system kind of keeps them in this little bubble and calls them a guest. Because by finishing the profile, that's how the system really knows what to do with a user. Specifically with the online application, you know, interest types drive the checklist and helps us kind of group with, well, this person's a teacher, so they're going to need certificated reference types, and they're going to need to give us, they're going to need to, you know, indicate there's, like if they have a certificate and so on. If they don't tell us anything like that, we don't really know, especially if someone just comes and creates an account and doesn't go any further than that. They don't tell us any address information or anything. We don't really know what to do with them. So that guest role is just kind of a way to keep them, they have an account, but we don't know how to group them. Another thing to know that when someone's the first time through and they're a guest, you can't really look them up in applicant search yet, because most people, when they go into applicant search, other than HR admin, they have to pick an interest type in order to complete a search. Well, if someone's a guest and hasn't selected an interest type, they're not going to be able to find that person. So that's where some people get really confused, and they're like, well, this person has an account, and then they go over to user roles, and they give someone the role of applicant, thinking that's going to solve all their problems. Well, now they have the role of applicant. They should come up in applicant search, but they never completed their profile. They still don't have any interest types selected. And the system's like, I don't know what to do with this person. They didn't follow our process. Computers are so linear, they follow the steps. Humans, not so much. We jump from A to Z all the time. And, in our mind, things make sense where a computer is like, doesn't compute. So the big thing is when you see someone with the role of guest, most often that indicates they haven't completed their profile. However, if you've archived someone and you've chosen to delete their disclosure, when we delete a disclosure, we remove the role of applicant and put someone back to guest, because that's the one way to force an applicant to go back through that profile and ensure that they redo their disclosure. Does that make sense? Does anybody want to have a conversation about that guest role or have questions or need it maybe clarify a little bit more what that means? Or Deb, do you want to add anything?
So we have an employee who is showing as a guest role, and I asked her to complete her profile. Is there anything I can do in the background? Like, I don't want to answer the disclosure questions for them. I don't think I should. But is there anything I can do to spur them on?
Not necessarily. I mean, you could select an interest type for them if the problem is that disclosure piece,
Yeah.
Because if they do at least that part, then you could do the other parts. Does that make sense? Because the disclosure comes before the picking of the interest types.
Okay. Well, it's a teacher, so it wouldn't be rocket science to choose that, but.
Well, maybe you and I could have a side conversation.
Okay.
Maybe after. Yeah.
That sounds good. Thanks, Bree.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and a lot of districts, when they first launch their portal, choose to load their employees, and all they do is they load their basic information. They, maybe put address, phone number, and stuff, but they force their employees to go through the profile and kind of reaffirm and pick double check the interest type, preferences, whatever. And so they give them the guest role to show, so they can, and then they have to go through and get their checklist. And that's one way they can kind of keep track of who's logged in and who hasn't and everything too. So, but we do find that some districts really struggle with a certain percentage of employees with getting them to actually just log in and do that small step, because it doesn't take very long. And I don't know what the hang-up is with some people, but it can be a little bit of a hang-up for a few. Okay. Another word of caution that we find, I know Deb and I find this from time to time, is people will go and add the applicant role on top of the guest role, thinking that'll fix their problems too. So someone will be a guest and an applicant. That's a no-no. They have to be one or the other. And if you do that, like if you go and shadow their account, you're going to get that big, ugly, critical error message, and things just aren't going to work right. Because, like I said, computers are very logical. Someone's a guest and they don't have a checklist, or someone's an applicant and they do have a checklist. But when they have both a guest and an applicant role, it's like, well, which one is it? And that's where that error message pops up. So that's another common issue that we run across when someone calls us and says, they have an error on the account, what's wrong? I'd just like to point that out. So applicant. So you have your user, they go in, they complete their profile, and the system handles this part for you. So you shouldn't even have to worry about this. Once they complete that profile, the system knows and it removes that guest role, so you don't have to worry about it, and it replaces it with the applicant role. And then once that happens, well, when it does that, a couple things happen. They get an automatic email message letting them know that they've completed their profile, that they've got a checklist added to their account. Any special instructions that the district put in that message gets included. that applicant now shows up under applicant search, so anybody can search from that has access to that screen and that type of applicant or locate, you know, all that fun stuff. And also, I know I just lost my train of thought. That's not, you know, not normal for me on this type of day. And the, what was I going to say? It'll come to me later. But anyway, so the role, one role goes away and the other role gets replaced. Pretty simple. And for most, you know, that's it. You're good to go. Okay. There are a couple other basic roles that, you know, fit in this category. We've got the employee role, and all the employee role, you know, the employee role is basically to indicate that the user is an employee. It's kind of a flag. So, you know, you can search for that person under the employee information menu. It marks they're an employee under applicant search and on reports. This is an automatic role. You have to assign it. However, when you complete a job recommendation, you can have the system add the role to an account, which is nice. The employee role can also be really handy because you can set up defaults within your system to make employees see or not see or do or not do things. So some districts choose if an applicant's an employee, they make them not have to do a disclosure, or they don't see the, or they can't edit their address information because HR wants to be in control of that because of payroll or whatever. So there's different defaults that can be turned on or off within the system. If you use the employee role, you have the option to do internal posting. So only when someone's logged in and they have the role as employee, they would see that posting, so the outside public wouldn't have access to applying for a job. So there's some pros and cons to using the employee role. The big thing is if you use it, you also have to remember to update it. So when people term, you have to remember to remove that role as well. And so, you know, that's just part of that, your business practice. How do you handle when people leave, removing roles and such? Okay. The other basic, and the last basic role when it comes to the job system is the substitute role. You know, this is a newer role we had a couple years back. This is similar to the employee role. It just flags a user, marks the user, however you want to, whatever word makes the most sense to you, that this user, this applicant, is a substitute within your system. So they get marked on reports with a little S, and then they have a little icon in applicant search. This is also not an automatic role, and you have to remember to assign it. However, when you use job recommendations, you have the option, I believe, to remove the substitute role and replace it with the employee role. So hopefully those two roles make sense. Those are the basic roles. You know, they don't have any special access or anything. They're just basic roles that any user, in essence, could have. So moving on to specialty roles. Supervisors. We have 1 through 9, and they all correspond to your interest type. So if your first interest type listed on your portal is certificated teacher, Supervisor 1 would correspond to your certificated teachers, and so on. That's how that works. Supervisor roles give access limited to that specific interest type related to jobs and applicants at that user's assigned location. So an example, on my site, interest type is 1, is certificated teacher, and I've given access to my user. Let's say his name is Principal Pat, and so he works at the high school. So if I post a job at the high school for a certificated teacher, Pat could look up that job and see just, just jobs at the high school for the certificate that fall under the certificated teacher category. He wouldn't be able to see jobs at the middle school because that's not his location. And he wouldn't be able to see classified jobs because I hadn't given him access to classified jobs. So it's just his interest type and his location. You do have the ability to give a user, to assign a user 3 locations. So if someone's split or works at more than one location, you have a little flexibility. And you can give someone, all 9 supervisors if you need to. By giving someone a supervisor role, that automatically gives them the ability to see that applicant search menu and the applicant report menu when they underneath the management tab. It also gives them access to the resources menu. I forgot to put that on there, so I apologize. That makes sense how the supervisor role fits in. Hopefully it does. And hopefully as we go on through some more of these roles, you'll kind of see how you kind of mix them up together. For some districts, they only give their hiring managers the ability to go to applicant search and applicant reports. They don't enter job requests or job recommendations. They don't use screening. They don't use the interview tool. So that's kind of why it's set up this way. They just go, they search, and they can look at reports. Then we have a role called job request. So this one works in conjunction with the supervisor roles. So Principal Pat, I gave him the job request role. So now he can go in and he can add a job request for his location for those certificated teacher role jobs because he has that supervisor role because they work in conjunction. Does that make sense? Hopefully, I'm not totally confusing people. So it's the job request role gives the user access to the job request menu. But if you just gave someone job request and not a supervisor role, they would see the menu, but they wouldn't be able to do anything. So you have to give a combination of the two. So you give them access to the menu, and then you have to say, well, what type of applicant? So they work together. And because of that, it's limited by location and applicant type because you're working in tandem with those supervisor roles. Job interview. This one also kind of that same idea. You give someone the job interview role, they're going to see the job interview menu and give access to that module. Same thing, you have to then make sure they have the correct supervisor role so they can then conduct and use the job interview module based on the type of applicant and location that they're assigned to. And then there's another interview role, which lets them be identified as the interviewer, like part of the interview team, so to speak. So maybe someone isn't necessarily going in and adding the interviewer, but they need to be part of the team. So there's ways to add, to identify them as someone who could be like, it's kind of hard to explain. One role lets them add and like actually do the recording and creation, and other one is so they can be part of the team and listed as things. But I think the documentation, when you go to the actual interview, the job interview documentation goes into much greater detail. It's kind of hard to put it into a 1 or 2 sentence here. But that's where I'd say go to that and it explains it a lot better. Because it could take me 20 minutes here, and I know this isn't we don't have 20 minutes just for this particular role. Okay, hopefully I'm not totally confusing you. Screener, we have a menu item under management for job screening, and this role gives a user access to that job screener menu and identifies a user as a screener for someone who can actually record screening events and enter, data on the scale. And it also works, in conjunction with those supervisor roles. So if you want someone to screen for classified, they need to have the appropriate job screener role that matches up with your classified interest type. And it's all meant for security and to keep people to only access the applicants they should be. Because we want to keep your hiring managers, you know, safe, and we don't want to open anybody up to unnecessary liability. That's really why things are the way they are. You don't want to give someone too much access because they can get into trouble. And that's really why things are set up the way they are. You want to limit information because human beings do really stupid stuff. We'll just leave it at that. And job recommendation, exactly the same idea. Give someone the job recommendation role. They now have the option to see the job recommendation menu under the applicant or under the management tab. But you have to give them the appropriate supervisor role to actually be able to use it. Does that make sense? I hope so. Any questions? Routers. Some of you use routers, some of you do not. Routers are those contacts, those people that are signing off on your job requests and job recommendations, whether it be, you know, if it's a new, an existing, or a recommendation. Hopefully you guys understand that, how that works. You just give that person the role of router, and then you can add them in the sequencing of your routing to your position table. Program manager. So we talk about how supervisors are limited by their location. If you give someone the role of program manager, it overrides the location component and gives access to all locations. So it no longer looks at where they're assigned, and it opens it up to all the locations. This was really intended for people like maybe a director of special education, and their assignment might be district office, but they're going to be hiring for every location, you know, all the elementary schools, middle school, high school, and everything. That was kind of the intention behind this role, or food services, or, you know, someone who's hiring your custodians and whatnot. That's kind of the role, or the idea behind the program manager role. Not typically maybe someone like a high school principal wouldn't typically be a program manager, or those manager, you know, those people that oversee programs. Thus the name program manager. If you ever have questions, or you have a scenario and that you want to run by the support team, we love, you know, talking through those scenarios. Say, I have this person, this is what they're doing, this is kind of their role. You know, we'll walk you through the appropriate roles to assign them. You know, we can try it, and some of it you might say, well, it's not quite working, you know, and then we can help you modify and tweak roles to make sure that you're giving them the right amount of access, but not necessarily too much access. I said that same thing. You want to kind of limit your liability, and you know, you just don't want to give them access to everything. Last spring, I think it was, or this summer, we added a new role called job screener. And this role, and I like to highly stress this role is intended for people that aren't your typical job screeners. These are people that don't already have roles within the system. These are for those kind of special, you know, occasions. Maybe you're hiring a high school principal and you want some of your high school teachers to be in on the screening process. So they're not typically hiring, but you want them to be a screener for that particular job. And this is a role where you can go in and give them access to that one particular job. If you give this to someone who already is set up as a screener within the system, it wipes out their higher level access, and they no longer are going to see what they used to be able to see. We had a lot of people kind of get excited on this and start handing this out to people and realizing, oh no, now they can't see their jobs anymore. So this is another one. If you have questions, please contact Deb and I, and we can kind of walk you through and listen to what your specific needs are, and maybe come up with a better solution or an alternate solution on how to handle those odd situations that come up. But yeah, this particular role limits access by interest type and to a very specific role. And we've got very detailed directions on the resource page on how to use it, how to set it up. There's some very special setup involved. And we even have a little YouTube video on how to use it to try to help you guys out on using this new role. Okay. Questions about the specialty roles? Hope I'm making sense and I'm not confusing you guys.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a way or a report that we could pull that shows where everybody's at as far as what access they have or what roles they have assigned?
Yes, and we're going to get to that very soon.
Perfect.
Because that's
all right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent question. Okay, so we're almost done talking about roles, and then we're going to move on to managing roles and pulling a report. So thank you, that was a fabulous question. So I've got 3 roles left to talk about. And I talked about that third category is the limited roles. HR admin and HR district admin. The big HR admin, that gives you master access to everything under the management tab. So you see everything, all job and all applicant information, including all the confidential information. When you give someone the HR admin role, you don't necessarily need to give them any of the lesser, those specialty roles that are beneath it other than maybe router. Because some of those lesser roles will block their higher role access. Because I see people do that and they're wondering why all of a sudden they can't see anything. This HR admin role kind of trumps everything. That's meant for basically HR staff is what that role is meant for. And then if you're part of a co-op, we have a slightly lesser version. It's the HR district admin where they have HR admin access, but only for their particular district. So they can't see the other districts within the co-op. And then the last limited access role, and actually I think probably one of the most important roles to really understand the implications of giving this role out is the system manager role. So the system manager role gives you access to that system manager tab and everything under that. And typically everything under the management role, a management tab too, because the system manager is kind of meant to aid and help. And so the system manager gets access to the lookup tables and all the setup functions. And it's also meant to help people with accounts, user accounts, passwords, resetting emails, all that fun stuff. They have the ability to shadow users. But because they have the ability to modify setups and defaults, like they can go to the system processes and whatnot, and they're multi-system, they can do some damage if they go in and they're poking around and don't know what they're doing. So just a word of caution, you don't give that out to everybody. You just need to make sure that when you're handing that out, you're handing it out to the right people. Okay, so that's the roles. How do we use them? Okay, whoops, we're going to get out of the PowerPoint because we're going to go to the live site now. Okay, sorry, I've got lots of things open. I talked about documentation. So we've gone through and updated documentation, and like I said, I'm slowly getting it up to all the sites. So we go into great detail about the roles. There's new definitions. You'll notice they're specific to just the portal you're on instead of all the portals. That was really confusing in the past. There's a section on managing the roles. So how do you assign roles, the 2 different ways, the 2 most common ways. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then even how do you pull reports on that. So that's what we're going to go over now. So let's go to the release site. And I don't know why it looks so funky and weird. So let's refresh that. That is, my screen might be being weird. We might just start over and reopen that. Sorry guys, sometimes technology isn't our friend. There we go. Okay. So Anybody who has access to the System Manager tab has the ability to add or remove roles to users. If you go to the System Utilities menu, there's really two ways you can add or remove or manage users' roles. When you get to this page, it defaults to the Assign Roles function or menu, and then you have one called User Accounts. So we'll start on Assign Roles since we're here. And first thing you always do is select the portal. So we're talking about the job application portal. I'll start with that. And then you're going to select the role that you're interested in either adding or removing. So let's pick on HR admin. So if I wanted to add another HR administrator to my site, it's pretty easy. I would come in here and I would need to know the last name of the person I want to add the role to. And I would start by clicking on that. And I want to add it to Mr. Program Manager. I find their name in my drop-down list. And I click Add User to the Role. And you'll now see that that person is over here on the right-hand side. Maybe I made a mistake. I don't want them there anymore. I can select their name and remove it. So it works either way. You can add people, you can remove people. And you can pick another role. So that's one way to manage roles, to add or remove roles from a user. Another way is to go directly to the user's account. So I could go here and find that same user, Program Manager. And you guys hopefully all know that you can search by any of these fields. And then when you find the person you want to edit, you're going to click on the pencil. And I can see right here, this person is authorized on the job portal. So this is a good person to make changes to roles on. And I'm going to click on the pencil. And there's an option right here to look at their roles by selecting user roles. And kind of the same concept, I have to first identify the portal that I'm going to make changes onto. And based on which portals you subscribe, this menu looks a little different. If you only have one portal, you're going to only have one option. And all the roles show up here. And you just simply go in and you pick the role you want to add. And you would, we'll make them a router. And you would save the role. You'll notice, I'm going to show you a little something here. If you're going to be doing multiple changes to roles for multiple users, it can be problematic if you use this particular screen. And I'll show you an example of why. So I've just made changes to Program Manager's account. And now I want to go make changes to Alice's account. Well, when I open User Roles, if you remember the first time I opened Program Managers, I had to select a portal, but on this time I didn't. So that tells me right away that my computer is caching. And if you guys are familiar with what that means, it's trying to predict what I'm doing, and so it's trying to speed up time and everything, save time. And it's actually showing me Program Managers roles. These aren't actually Alice's roles. And so if I make any changes, I might not be making the right changes. So if it ever opens automatically to roles and you don't select a portal, that's a good indicator that it's caching, and you might run into a little trouble. Because it's a screen within a screen, the programmers have not quite figured out a way to control the caching. So just a little tip, if you have more than one portal, the quickest way to fix it is to quickly select another portal and come back, and you're going to notice the roles look vastly different now. Alice only had 3 roles. So if I had made changes, I could have made some real big mistakes to Alice's account and probably messed things up, made a big mess of things. So I'd just like to point that out, that that's a problem that we're aware of. We're trying to, because it's a screen within a screen, it's a struggle. We're working on it, but we're not quite sure how to handle it. If you don't have another portal to select from, I like to just go and refresh my screen so I can, it'll force me to have to restart or reselect things, and it will be accurate information. Does that make sense? I just like to show that to people so that you don't accidentally go and make a mess of your data. And hopefully you guys know these two different ways to add roles. So now the fun part. How do I get a list of the roles of my users? So on your portals, there are two ways to access export information. You can access it under the System Manager tab or under the Management tab. It's the same list. You just get to go and pick where you want to pull it from. And there is a report. It's on tab 2, or if you know the name of it, you can start typing it. And that report is called User Roles. And every site has it. Every portal has it. So it doesn't matter which portal you're on, this export lives there. The key to know is how to sort it and how to use it. And on that documentation that you will find on your site, there's a little key here. Oops, I went too fast, sorry. Each portal is assigned a number. Employee records is 0, jobs is 1, PD is 2, and volunteers is 3. So if I want to look at roles specific to the jobs portal, I always start by filtering this to 1. And once it filters, which it did, this is all my users right now on the jobs portal and all the roles. And so I have options. I can pull a list of by role. So I could say I want to know every program manager, or I want to look at every router, or however. I could just export to this Excel right now and start filtering and getting different lists however I want. Or I could look by individual user. So maybe I want to just see what program manager roles are and nobody else's. I could, oops, I can't spell, so that would be part of the problem. I could filter just for that user and then export. Are you guys familiar with using export information, hopefully? Anyway, so you have the option to filter by role name, user. Any of these fields are filterable. You can sortable, that would be a better word. And then you can get the list how you want it and then export it out to Excel and you get a nice list. This is a good thing to do and to check, you know, fairly often, especially when you have movement, and especially with any of those specialty roles. Like, so if people are leaving, like hiring managers when they term, or maybe they go to a job where they're no longer accessing applicant information, it's not a bad idea to come and just dump this to Excel and filter and check who still has access to the different roles, and do I need to do some cleanup? And it's not a bad idea to maybe come up with, you know, a timeline where you check this a couple times a year, so then you know who do I need to go in and maybe do a little cleanup with. Does that make sense? I hope so. So I'm going to remind you that again. So System Manager, export information, and the name of the report is User Roles. And on the documentation, which will be on your site if it isn't already, it's on the page 6 and 7, I believe, is where it's on page 7 and 8. It's under this export information, and it'll walk you through all the steps. It'll tell you the name. It'll tell you even how to filter the report. It'll give you tips on where to go, and here's a little sample of it so that you can filter by user ID, portal, and then export. All right. That's kind of it on user roles. I don't know if that helped clarify, you know, cleared anything up or not. Hopefully maybe got at least one thing out of that. I'm going to stick on the line and answer any questions. But otherwise, you are free to go because I know how busy it is, especially in HR, and especially, well, it's always busy. There's never really a lull time. But thank you for your time, and I appreciate your guys for joining us today.